Hello and welcome to the David Icke videocast. I was going to choose a subject this week of looking at some of the things that are likely to happen in 2018, but that'll have to wait till next week because what was going to be on top of the list is already happening, and that is Iran. The simple truth is that the United States, Israel, and throw Britain in there as well because they're always in there, is at war with Iran. They may not be dropping bombs yet and invading the place, but they're at war by any definition of the term. And it is so unbelievably predictable. As I've been pointing out year after year, the sequence of countries that was chosen and planned long ago in the Middle East to pick off country after country and change the regime. For those that have not come across this sequence before, I'll go through it briefly and as quickly as I can. In September 2000, an organization in the United States called the Project for the New American Century, which was created by ultra-Zionists called Robert Kagan and William Kristol, and including people who eventually would become the Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, President in truth under Bush, the Secretary of State for Defense at the Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld, the Deputy Defense Secretary, Paul Wolfowitz, the person who controlled the entire Pentagon budget, the Comptroller, Dov Zakheim, and such like. They were key players in this project for the New American Century. And this group produced a document in September 2000 listing a series of countries they wanted to regime change and have the United States military fight, quote, multiple theater wars to bring this about. Those countries included Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, North Korea, China, also Lebanon. And what we've seen ever since, under regime after regime in the United States, is that list being ticked off and that agenda being followed. Literally a few months after that document was published, people that were involved in writing it, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Zakheim, Cheney, were controlling the Bush administration and its military decision-making and policy. Under Bush, they invaded Iraq on a lie, aided by a liar-in-chief in the United Kingdom, Tony Blair. Then Blair and Bush were replaced by Obama and Cameron, David Cameron, Prime Minister of Britain, and they ticked another off the list, which was Libya, and started the process of trying to do the same in Syria. But eventually they were stopped from achieving that end by the intervention of Russia and Vladimir Putin. And now they're going to the next on the list. Well, they've all also putting the pressure on and highlighting and demonizing North Korea. But the next on the list in terms of this week and the events of this week is Iran. And we can look at this situation and see with this alone how there is a hidden hand orchestrating events no matter who is officially in power. whether it's Republican or Democrat, whether it's Labour or Conservative in Britain, this same ongoing agenda unfolds. And now we are seeing protests and a attempt at an uprising in Iran, which is classic in the way that the United States and Israel, because you can't divide the two, operate in terms of regime change. Because the thing is that if you keep invading countries outright militarily, as with Iraq, then people start to see there's an obvious sequence here. Well, we're invading someone else. What's going on? So what you do is you get the people themselves to remove your target regime and claim that it's a people's revolution, when what you have actually been doing is supporting groups and factions within the target country with information, with intelligence, with training, and with weapons to bring about that very people's revolution, which is actually just a revolution to remove the regime you don't want. And you see this in country after country on this list: Libya, Syria. What we're seeing now, attempted in Iran, is just Libya and Syria repeated, revisited. And when you have Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State in the United States, openly saying recently that they were supporting groups against the government in Iran, supporting their attempts to remove the government of Iran, then you can see what actually is going on in Iran this week. Because no country is perfect, and Iran and its government and its religious power structure is very, very far from perfect, to say the very least. But what you do in whatever country you're targeting is you pick up resentment against the government that is there anyway, and then you use that for your own ends. And what the United States has been doing is imposing economic sanctions on Iran. And that has brought about economic problems which seem to be the basis of those genuine protesters in Iran this week, in terms of them being unhappy with the government. Now, all that I've just said, don't take my word for it. I'll give you the military document text that explains exactly what I've just described. This is the US Special Forces Unconventional Warfare Strategy, published in November the 30th, 2010. Now, that was just 2 weeks. Of course, when they publish it, it's been in train and action long before. But this was just 2 weeks before the fake, manipulated, manufactured Arab Spring began in Tunisia. And this is what this document says, is their policy and their strategy. The US military's unconventional warfare strategy requires the target state population perceptions are first groomed into accepting an armed insurrection, using, quote, propaganda and political and psychological efforts to discredit the government, creating local and national agitation, helping organize boycott strikes and other efforts to suggest public discontent before beginning the, quote, infiltration of foreign organizers and advisors and foreign propaganda, material, money, weapons, and equipment. And that is exactly what happened in Libya and Syria quite blatantly. It goes on, if retaliation by the target government occurs, the resistance can exploit the negative consequences to garner more sympathy and support from the population by emphasizing the sacrifices and hardship the resistance is enduring on behalf of the people. Now look at the public statements this week from Israeli leaders like Netanyahu and from American leaders like Trump and Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador for the United States. Look at their statements and the statements of others, and it's straight off the pages of this military document from November the 30th, 2010. And when you have Rex Tillerson openly saying we are supporting anti-government groups in Iran, how does that square with all the manufactured hysteria about Russia intervening in the affairs of the United States and its elections and others in Europe? How does that square? The United States, Israel, and the UK, always in there, have interfered in the internal affairs of other countries on a scale unmatched by any other countries on earth. The hypocrisy is stunning. And so here we have a situation where you have the long and disgusting history of these countries interfering in the affairs of other countries to remove regimes they don't want and to put people in power that support them and will nod and do whatever they want. Including, by the way, an infamous CIA British instigated coup in Iran in 1953 when the Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, was removed, well documented now, because he wouldn't play ball in terms of doing what the Western oil companies wanted him to do. In other words, let them take all the resources of Iranian oil, basically with the people getting nothing. And we are now supposed to believe that these same forces and these same countries, same regimes in the West are suddenly filled with sympathy and concern for the people of Iran. People who have suffered economically because of the sanctions imposed by the United States. And we shouldn't ever lose sight of the fact that when we're talking about the United States, we're talking about Israel. And if we're talking about Israel, we're talking about the House of Rothschild, which owns the place. And when you look at the makeup and the creators of the Project for the New American Century that produced that document in September 2000, it's a mass of ultra-Zionists, including a large number of dual American Israeli citizens. And they have been pursuing an agenda via the United States military and the United States government that actually suits and is demanded by Israel. So it's no surprise this week to see people like William Crystal, co-founder of the Project for the New American Century, coming out pressing for action against Iran as the protests unfolded. And it's no surprise either to see the same line being taken by Donald Trump, who is owned by ultra Zionists. Never mind what people say. You can't say that. Well, I've just said it, and I'll go on saying it because it's true. He is owned by ultra Zionists, not least around him, immediately around him, Jared Kushner, his son in law, who is a lifelong friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. And if you look at the number of ultra Zionists around Trump, not just in his administration, but in the groups that got into power, you'll see that the ratio is fantastic compared with what you would expect it to be. And if you look at the video that I put with this video cast by a man, a rabbi in the United States, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, you will see him demolish the hoax that is Zionism, as he points out that Zionism is not the Jewish people, something I've been saying for so long, and that Zionism and Israel, which are the same thing basically, are assaulting his religion, which does not comply with the actions and the agenda of Israel and Zionism. And so when you see the comments this week by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it takes into the stratosphere, it takes into the realm of incomprehension the scale of hypocrisy that it is possible for a human being to manifest. These were Netanyahu's comments on what has been happening in Iran. The people of Israel and Iran will once again be great friends once the Iranian regime is gone. What he really means, if you look at the newspeak, he's saying that the people of Iran will once again not be great friends, but the people of Iran will be controlled by Israel and the United States. He goes on, I wish the Iranian people success in their quest for freedom. They seek freedom, they seek justice, they seek basic liberties that have been denied them for decades. This is a man that runs a regime in Israel and has followed many other regimes in Israel since 1948 that have treated the Palestinian people in Palestinian land, which they've stolen, so grotesquely, it beggars belief and it challenges language. People who are controlled by a military junta in the occupied lands of Palestine. And he has the nerve to talk about the Iranian people seeking justice and seeking freedom. He knows that these protests are an attempt to target a regime in Iran that Israel and the United States and those in the hidden hand that control them both want to remove. He also fails to mention the massive protests in Israel against Netanyahu over corruption in government. The hypocrisy, like I say, can almost not be comprehended. So we see the hypocrisy, but where is the mainstream media pointing this out? Nowhere. They just report what these people say without the context of what it's really all about. Have you ever seen in this week's news coverage mention of the project for the New American Century and that list of countries they wanted to target, and they blatantly have ever since? And then we have a Donald Trump, of course, singing from his song sheet, with again the nerve to say that the Iranian government is wasting Iranian money on terrorism. Note there's no mention of Saudi Arabia, one of the great terrorist states on earth and terrorist supporting states on earth, that has killed or maimed so far an estimated 35,000 people in Yemen using British and American weapons. But look how close Saudi Arabia is to Israel when you thought that you'd think they would be massively antagonistic. Saudi Arabia is not targeted because it's not yet on the list for regime change, but give them time. Iran is, so they're all together pressing for action against Iran. And you have Trump talking about wasting Iranian resources on supporting terrorism when the United States spends more on the military than the next 8 countries combined. And that money is not spent on protecting Americans in the land of America. It's spent on all this global conquest and upheaval that I'm talking about. That American military, with that unthinkable amount of money spent, not least with the armament companies that are controlled by the same people, is little more than the biggest terrorist organization the world has ever seen. But the gutless media won't tell you that. The gutless politicians won't tell you that. And so we have this story unfolding according to the script put out by the official story sources on what is happening in Iran and why. And what they have around the world are ultra-Zionist attack groups, attack dog groups, who are there precisely to target anyone who is exposing this and call them anti-Semitic, to try to close down their public meetings, to try to silence them in every way they can. Because what is happening is so different to what we're told is happening. What is happening is so utterly grotesque in terms of human decency and sheer basic humanity. And where we're being taken is into a nightmare of centralized global dictatorship that would make Orwell wince. Now that has to be kept from people. So the mainstream media, no problem, they're not going to tell you. But those who will, they have to be silenced. And this is why this network of ultra-Zionist hate groups, because they're trying to get the public to hate their targets, is there to silence people like me. When all I'm saying is what people like Rabbi Shapiro are saying, that Zionism is not the Jewish people. Israel is not the Jewish people. And the whole Zionist story, orchestrated overwhelmingly in modern times by the Rothschilds, is just a hoax, not least on the Jewish people themselves, which Shapiro will understand, and not just on the world in general. So, what is happening in Iran is nothing like the mainstream media have been telling us, nothing like what the politicians have been telling us. And the truth, if we just see it for what it is and what it really is, opens up a whole new vista, a whole new panorama from which to view the world. Events are not random in terms of world-changing events. They are carefully, precisely orchestrated to a very psychopathic and horrific end. We need to wake up to that to make sure that end cannot